Okay, so I'm Candace Floyd. I'm at the Atlanta VA and Emory University. And this is Marianne.
I'm Marianne Martone from the San Francisco VA and the University of California, San Diego, and we can talk about how that happened, but
So what are the main takeaways from day one?
yeah,
So
we
want
thought
to
it'd be better to engage you at this point rather than
tell
speak
you.
anymore, right?
Oh, stand still, yeah.
Mhm.
So what's the one thing you learned today?
We're gonna go by table, so volunteer.
I learned that my trainees are already doing this and I didn't understand it.
Good for your trainees.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah,
Very good. Okay, how about that table right behind that gentleman?
they were already doing it. So yeah.
Mhm.
Do you guys have a lesson from today?
You can say what you have learned. You can also say what you're still confused about.
Yeah, I'm learning, and I'm also like Lex is an expert, so actually, telling us now like what constitutes exactly the tidy format, like exactly the structure and its uses in the future. Also, you showed us another tool to verify like the parameters of the like common identifiers. So a different shiny, right?
Oh, sorry, the quality data app on the ODC TBI. I was just showing.
I think that's for tomorrow, right? Yes.
We're ahead. Okay.
They're ahead of the game. They get extra cupcakes tomorrow. Yeah. Anybody else? Take homes?
What other lessons have we learned?
Nobody wants it?
Nothing about CDEs? How many people think that they, based on today, are more likely to use CDEs than they were before? All right, Russell, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Michelle, right? We learned where to find them and we know like the blast ones are coming, so stay tuned, right? So we learned about that.
How many are less likely to use CDEs because they feel it's still way too much work or they don't see the relevance to themselves? And you can be brutally honest, brutally honest. Okay, Adam's not going to use CDEs. But Adam is one of the ones who, often fights against it, interestingly enough.
Yeah, it is funny, right? But what I wanted to point out is that Audrey pointed out that the CDEs for the baseline, like the Smith CDEs, aren't listed on Precise, right?
I could not. Yes, no, I learned as I was I learned a couple things. First off, use the right language when speaking. Data dictionary elements are not the same as common data elements. And also, as I was trying to develop some unique data elements that are not common, I realized that on Precise, I couldn't find common data elements for animal information.
Yes, they're not labeled correctly.
Oh, what are they labeled as?
So if you look at the first one that says metadata, if you go down to the bottom, it has sex, it has injury types, it has core, but you don't know that from the label because you see study. So I was going to bring that up because I was like, wait, where are they?
Thank you.
Yes,
I think we just learned something new. That was great.
exactly. Exactly. That's where they are.
And there is on the website a place for you to put in questions or suggestions. So if you're not seeing something that you're sure should be there, just drop a line in the questions and somebody will get to it. Candace will get to it, or give it to Michelle to get to it.
So the Smith paper doesn't have any CDEs per se, right? It's just the categories. And there's still more general animal information that we're also trying to get in final format final for the next release. So there'll be a bunch of those. So for example, like you won't find right now the anesthesia, analgesics, those types of things, but they're almost ready to be released. And these are based on like when we did the 913 the first time, a lot of those are in there. We're just revisiting and improving those. And just like Candace said, if you have suggestions or you find some that aren't in there, you might they're not there yet, they're about to be released, but don't hesitate to contact us and say, hey, because things do come up that we never thought of. So yeah, don't hesitate to ask.
Also, I think from, we had a session this morning on spinal cord injury, common data elements, and Lynn gave a very excellent talk about what was going on at NIH. And it sounds like NIH also finally has sort of a taxonomy that really can be used to organize these common data elements. And so there are things called general core elements, which are meant to be things that you would use across all studies. But then there are ones that are disease specific and other types of specificity. So with all of these things, they're a work in progress, and there's often a lot of confusion at the very beginning about how things are going to work. And eventually they sort of shake themselves out. But I think NIH is really making some strides in trying to bring some order to the CDE chaos that we can take advantage of. Lynn?
Yeah, actually, those categories were
Mhm.
started in 2006 and adopted by the TBI clinical and then the TBI preclinical. So we're coming around full circle maybe. But that's great. The question I had actually was a suggestion because what I learned today is that there is a whole file of metadata elements that spinal cord injury doesn't have to reinvent. They're already done. They're great. They're awesome. So a suggestion from NINDS, one of the things that we care a lot about is being able to get information about a study to determine what was done in order to minimize the risk of bias, otherwise known as rigor. And so I was curious about whether or not there could be metadata elements that could be created and used across studies about things like blinding, randomization. Just right now, there are check boxes in a publication somewhere that may or may not line up with anything, but it's something that we could include in the data set so that we would be able to pull down and only pull down those sets that have blinding or whatever.
Yeah.
Just a suggestion from my colleague, Shai Silverberg.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's interesting that is coming up, and we've heard this before, and this is really one of the biggest, I would say, impediments to people really starting to embrace a lot of these different types of tools, is that if you start to enumerate the things that you need to know, it becomes overwhelming and daunting. And I think that there are plenty of things that we would like to be able to query on, and I think you'll appreciate a little bit more tomorrow what PRECISE is doing, right? There are things that we can extract from the literature and we can structure those in a knowledge graph. Those things can link to the publication, to the data sets that are there, and therefore through the knowledge graph, it becomes possible to query for only those studies that have randomization or blind randomization, right? So, I think that I happen to be a big believer, and I open this up to the audience, that as we've talked about before, and I think Anita said very well, it's great if we can at least get 5 structured metadata elements across thousands of data sets. There's a lot that you can do. But one of the things that we want to make sure everybody knows is that it is better to include it in a paper than not to include it at all. It is better to include it in a protocol as unstructured information, than to not include it at all. And so nothing that we ever say up here should be meant to imply that you should not store as much information about a data set as you possibly can in whatever form you are able to store that information. We also know with large language models and all the things that are coming out, they are getting better at extracting information from these types of unstructured data, unstructured meaning free text. So I think, what we're hoping in terms of the key takeaways is that one of them is not, oh, so I only have to collect these 5 metadata variables. No, right? You collect whatever you need to collect to support your study. Some of them will be common data elements. Some of them will be easily structured. Some of them might be in free text. Some of them might be in a protocol. But the publication of the future means that all of these things are linked together so that it is very easy through the DOIs to say this data set goes with this publication and this protocol, right? Very trivial operation for a computer to do if you publish them and you get these, these DOIs and the metadata is clear. So I think that that is one of the things that we really hope that people take away, is that more metadata is always better than less metadata. Right? So what are some other key takeaways that people might have taken away? What things are you thinking that maybe you're a little unsure of, or that we need to talk a little bit more about and discuss it?
Maybe putting some algorithms together for QCing data.
Anthony, wait for the microphone. Here you go, buddy.
The QC.
So, so one of the things that I hear a lot of is, these matrices are large, right? It's not just a question of, having your computer screen be as big as that screen right there, right? And you don't want to read these things until, your eyes bleed, right? So, if you can get a computer to do some of this compiling and screening of the data so that, one, you know what it is, and two, you know where all your blank cells are, and there's a log generated, you may be saving yourself some time. The other part of this is, which I think it took a while to appreciate, is you're pulling all these you're pulling all these Excel spreadsheets from different parts of Precise. And I'm calling it, Precise as sort of the blanket, because you got Precise on one side and you got ODC Commons on the other, right? And you're moving variables between these two spreadsheets. If at some point you can get this all down to a single spreadsheet by writing some type of script, you might be saving just a little bit of time. But the other thing that's really interesting, and I really like this between Adam and some of the data scientists, is once you get this data into the format that you have, the CSV format, you can turn around and put it into just about any which way you want in terms of doing post-processing. So there's some real strengths here. I wind up fishboning a lot of stuff, which is a way to look for problems, when you're designing a project. And, these are two things that kind of stuck out in my mind that make life a little bit complex. So just some ideas.
Okay. So, did somebody else take the microphone? How many people here who take spreadsheet data are using tidy format already? And how many are not using tidy format already? So based on what you heard today and the remark we had in front from Stu, but if all of a sudden they said, the funder said, hey, everything needs to be in tidy format, how much difficulty would you think that you might have in adapting your lab processes for tidy format? I'm seeing head shakes.
Audrey says 2 months.
2 months.
Oh,
Do I
yeah.
hear 3? Do I hear 3 months? 2 months going 3 months, 3 months, do I hear 4?
Way more, way more.
And, too often with a lot of the policies that come out, they're viewed more as a tax than a benefit, on the lab. But based on what you heard today, would you consider that it would be worth it for you to do that?
Well, before I answer that question, I have a question, which is, how far back do you want me to go? Because I am been
You're
doing
old.
this.
You're old.
Yeah, I'm old.
Yeah.
That's why.
I am always pragmatic, right?
Right. I have to
Yeah.
take the paper towels and add it into the Excel spreadsheet.
That's it.
No, I'm serious though. But
No, I do believe, so I think it is always, knowing from my time in the laboratory, and I was in an imaging center, and one investigator made us keep version 1 of the Bio-Rad confocal software for 25 years because he didn't want to recalibrate any of his data, right? But at some point, things become impractical and you have to adapt to new data structures, new technologies, new operating systems, and what have you. And those things always are disruptive. And the question is from as long as I've been in the data sharing, they're like, what about legacy data? What about legacy data? What about legacy data? And if you are of a certain age, I bet a lot of your legacy data is on media for which you no longer have readers, right? There may be things that are not documented. So I think one just has to be kind of practical about these types of things. And the real question is adopting this moving forward, do you take a hit someplace? Or is by refactoring, as Russell said, of starting this from the beginning, that cost is borne up front. And then after that, the cost gets less and less and less because more software becomes available to you, more expertise becomes available to you, more funding becomes available to you, right? Because you are complying with the mandates. But I think that's a question everybody has to answer.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So I
Mhm.
I think that's a good point. And I think
Mhm.
it's like about moving forward. So people like Adam and I and Russell and others have built a career on what we call data archaeology, which is basically going back into people's drawers and recovering that data. And so if you want to do that, then you can contact us and we'll do it. Uh, but if I think anything that we can gain moving forward is already a win. And so don't stress about the past.
Yeah, and I'm going to add also that, and I'll hand it to Adam. I remember when I was a grad student, I still had to go to this thing called the library, right? And it was only new articles that would come out. in
And
PDF.
not to drink coffee.
Right.
You weren't allowed to drink coffee in the library.
in the library. And only it was the new articles that came out as PDF. And then because how many man hours or person hours would it take to scan all those old documents? But eventually we improved the technology and all of a sudden now everything is there. So I think what's really important is the data you're working on today, that you're publishing today, that you're moving forward with today, you start now. And if you haven't published the studies from the last 3 years, maybe consider working on getting those. And then Abel and his friends are going to be developing tools to help us move the classic data forward. If it's on a 5.5-inch floppy, which most people under 3.5, yeah, that 3.5 is fine. That's fine. It's a 5-inch, that we will. But people will continue to develop those tools to help us migrate some of that really classic data forward if we need to.
Just want to plug a poster. Luis Rojas Valencia will be actually presenting the findings of a database from Penn that was collected in the 90s on a poster that she
There you go.
cracked open.
Actually, so because I didn't expect it, I'm preparing all these. So many questions coming out. Actually, my testimony is I pull out the data, even though from Alex's review right now, the data we pulled out 80 years ago. Whenever we're going to the Barnesmade, that's still the older version, less than 5. Version 5 before the animes, the format completely different. We manually do that. So actually when I have a meeting, so I was a kind of volunteer, say I put out the older file out. When are we getting there, it's a little bit challenging because of the format different, all things are different. But finally, we spent several months and did that. So we right now kind of answer the reviewer question to get data available. But moving forward, I want to credit VA to funding us to set up the home cage. That's a home cage we set up 4 years already. Yeah, it's out there, but the data we collected 2 years ago, and the data is industry-like standard, the coding. All these are fall into, even though now isn't still not considered common data element, but it's a data element because of this is a very new for home cage. And that's when you worry about how many pages. Maybe tomorrow I could show it. The total, the data set we have uploaded ODC-TBI is 276 pages. So you just keep on flipping up. There's a large data set over there. So I believe we only publish a fraction of the data. This data still could be dig out, right, for more of information. Yeah, so it's just kind of my testimony.
And I appreciate that. And we've appreciated Zizong has really stepped forward to be a test case for a lot of these different projects. But as we were talking about before, Zizong's computer ran out of power, and he goes, "Can you pull up a data set on ODC-TBI?" And I can show it. And that's exactly what he did. Why? Because it was on ODC-TBI. It was formatted, it was available, and you could pull it down. So I myself deeply believe, and I've used myself as an example many times. I have always appreciated when I have worked to make my data fair because I can find it reliably, I can access it, I can share it with others, I can do all kinds of things with it. I have bitterly regretted the times when I have not, because it's sitting on some floppy someplace and I don't know where it is anymore and I can't access it. So I think eventually, right, that's why I'm asking again, are you likely to do this? Do you view it as a tax? I keep pointing to Gene because it was quite a remarkable turnaround from we use GraphAd Pigeon and we're not going to use anything else. And if you don't provide us with a connector, we're not going to do it, to tidy format, tidy format, tidy format. Why? He's not trying to help us out. He was already quite clear. He's trying to help himself out, and that there is in fact a benefit to doing this. But this benefit is not instantaneous. If you start reading the papers, and I'm very much appreciating that a lot of researchers are publishing their experiences with implementing data management in their lab and implementing all of these and saying, you know what, this one was really hard, but this one gave us a tremendous payoff. This one was really hard and no, haven't seen any use to it yet, and being very honest about what the impact of really taking charge of their lab's data is going to be. And that's why I said I think we have to be practical about this, and nobody is asking anyone to go back 50 years and get all of that data. But, if it's possible, then you've given this data new life, right? You've given it new life because you can reliably find it. You can reliably share it. You can share it with postdocs who might want a new project from old data. There's a lot of value to it. So that's my 2 cents.